Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk to you about the Brahms Sextets. Both of them, two of the very, very greatest masterpieces of 19th century chamber music, and in my humble opinion, much greater than his quartets, although not necessarily his quintets, which I love equally well. But the two sextets, oh baby, this is hot stuff. This is really hot stuff. They were written in 1860s, between 1861 or so and 1865-ish, somewhere in that area. And they number Opus 18 and Opus 36. They are important works for a lot of reasons. First of all, they are really the first great significant string sextets after Boccherini's. It was not a medium that was much exploited, and after Brahms got his hands on it, a whole bunch of people jumped on the bandwagon. Dvorak did one, Tchaikovsky did one. Still, sextets tend to be rather rare. And I'm not quite sure why, because it's a wonderful medium. It really is. It allows you to relax a little bit, as string quartets tend not to, because everybody gets neurotic when they have to write a string quartet. You know, they feel they have to be contrapuntal and busy all the time, and it has to be serious and deep and profound. But as Mozart found out when he did his quintets, having an extra player or two changes the whole picture. You have a little bit of room to finagle. Your harmonies can become more succulent, your textures richer. You can exploit the simple sound of the string instruments, the sheer loveliness of texture, and revel in that in a way that string quartets tend to, not encourage. Really because of our tradition, not because string quartets don't do that. Haydn did it in his string quartets, but Beethoven did it in his string quartets, but later people tended to get neurotic. So chamber ensembles with an extra string or two, yeah. And especially composers like Brahms, who tended to be somewhat insecure and fussy and perfectionist, they really had a swell time when they could relax just a hair and do the sextets. And there wasn't really much competition, so Brahms was free to let his hair down and his imagination roam free. And that's what we get in these two works. Now, the first is in B flat, and it is, they're both absolutely gorgeous, but for my money, it's the G major that is just one of the most beautiful chamber works I ever heard in my life. And I've always loved it. But what really sold the package to me, as if it needed to be, but for me, was a wonderful New Year's soiree. It wasn't really a soiree, it was an afternoon an après-midi at the home of Brahms scholar, and literally God's gift to Brahms scholarship, Styra Avens, who every New Year's, except for this one because of the damn pandemic probably, but every previous New Year's has a beautiful chamber music fete with some good friends, and we all sit around, and she has this tiny, tiny room, her front room in her townhouse in Greenwich Village, and she just packs everybody in, including people with instruments, and there's a grand piano and a harpsichord, and people bring all their stuff. I'm desperately trying to get her to do the Villa-Lobos septet so I can play the tam-tam part. But until we get to that, she did the Brahms G major sextet, Opus 36. And let me tell you, those of you who think that chamber music is boring and that it doesn't, have enough sort of oomph, try sitting in the middle of it in a little tiny room. The way probably it was played in Brahms's day, this is how people made music. And I wouldn't give those New Year's days up for anything, because you learned so much just by listening and by sitting around in a convivial atmosphere with good snacks and just listening to the most glorious music in the world. And they did this sextet, and let me tell you, it just blew me away. After that, I went on a Brahms G major sextet binge, listening to every possible recording that existed and trying to find which ones did my favorite moments best, including the second subject of the first movement. Oh, God, it's so beautiful. And I'm going to play it for you because I have a really fine Naxos recording of it, so I can play you the exposition, and we're going to hear it. But the point is that this music is so impactful and expressive and masterfully put together. And when you get to hear it from the inside out, you really start to understand when people talk about chamber music, first of all, being sort of a player's medium. You have to sit in the middle of it and hear all of the parts working together up close and personal. It's so different from sitting distanced away in a concert. But even if you do that, the music works perfectly well, absolutely beautifully. So let me talk a little bit about just the G major quartet. I mean, and I don't want to shirk the B flat quartet the first because it's just as beautiful. I mean, there's such beautiful works. But this is the one that I have a real special feeling for. And I want to play it for you, a little bit of it, because it's an example of something that Brahms did that really, I think, is so wonderful and sort of little acknowledged among sort of casual listeners. You know, we just listen to stuff and go, ah, that's pretty. Brahms, of course, was a formal genius, and one of the things he did was reinvigorate, in certain respects, the classical style, which had become kind of sloppy and flaccid in the intervening years since Beethoven's death. And one of the things that we're taught in textbooks is that in first movement sonata form, you have usually an opening theme that's full of vim and vigor and energy. It's masculine. And then a more lyrical second subject, which is feminine and songful. And then your development and recapitulation and all that stuff. Quite often, Brahms does just the opposite. And he doesn't get credit, I think, for what he did with classical forms, sort of turning them on their ear to show what else you could still do. And this sextet, is a case in point because it begins with a theme which is almost rhythmless. It is dreamy and seductive, and just he does everything he can to try and negate the sense of a firm rhythmic pulse as this thing gets played. But then, of course, there is a huge buildup of passion, and you run into what I call the motion music that's going to take us to the second subject. Now, the movement is in 3/4. It's, which is waltz tempo, basically. But you don't know that. You don't hear it at any point until you get to the second subject, which is sung out by the cello and then the violin. And when you get to that, all of a sudden, you realize that from the very, very beginning, you've been moving in this wonderfully vigorous, athletic, lithe, nimble 3/4 waltz tempo. But you just haven't heard it until this point. But it's been an undercurrent running all the way through it. And so as the energy accumulates, it accumulates. It's all discharged in this stunning second subject that reaches a wonderful climax in which the whole ensemble literally just dances with pizzicati, and it's just so beautiful. It's an amazing piece of writing, a huge continuous paragraph that just builds up energy all the way from the beginning. And then, of course, Brahms has to deal with the question of how to calm down after he gets to this ecstatic climax, which is in itself actually sort of a clinic in how things like that should be done, because Brahms was nothing if not the master of transition. And so I want to play you the exposition of the G major quartet, just so you get a sense, especially for those of you who don't know these works, of just how beautiful and masterful they really, really are. And I want you to pay particular attention to the issue of movement, of momentum, of how the rhythm is concealed and then builds and then explodes, and then just an effusion of lyrical passion until we get to the end of the exposition. So I have a very good recording here, by the way. It's on Naxos, and it features the Stuttgart soloists. It's actually one of my very favorite performances of both of these sextets. The only issue with it is that they don't take exposition repeats. And I love the exposition repeats because the music is just so beautiful. But, that's a question of taste. So let's listen to the exposition of the quartet in G major, Opus 30, quartet, I keep saying that. Sextet in G major, Opus 36. Now, if that doesn't sell you, there is absolutely nothing I can say that will. Anyway, let's talk about recordings now. I mean, because we just mentioned this one on Naxos with the Stuttgart Soloist, which is superb. It really is. And I have 7 here, and they're in no order of preference particularly. There is one favorite that we'll get to at the end. But I've listened to like millions more. And the thing about these pieces is that they tend to be done very well. They really do, because they're kind of special. They're kind of special occasion pieces because of the fact that they're sextets, that you have to get 6 people together, which doesn't happen unless you really plan. Nobody takes them for granted, and they're written in such a way as to make such an immediately ingratiating impression. You always get a sense that the performers are enjoying every second of these pieces. You really do. They're so wonderful. So aside from that one on Naxos, I have here, this is the Brahms Complete Chamber Music Box on Deutsche Grammophon. It has the Amadeus Quartet. I was really prepared sort of not to go for these, because that's a group that we all kind of took for granted in the 60s and 70s. You know, they were good. Norbert Brainen, he had like a lot of vibrato, and everybody was like, well, you know, it's the Amadeus Quartet. Really good. They're absolutely terrific performances. I was completely thrilled to hear them again recently. I listened to them a week or so ago, and they are magnificent, beautiful, beautiful performances. Then we've got, the Raphael Ensemble on Hyperion, a beautiful, beautiful group. You know, the other thing that's interesting about these pieces, and this is true actually of I think both of them, the scherzos in both of them, maybe not, let me see here, not in number 1. In number 2. Yeah, the scherzo also in the G major. That also does the opposite of what these things are supposed to do. You know, most scherzos begin with a vigorous scherzo thing, and then they have a light and relaxed trio section. And that's not what happens at all in this sextet, the G major sextet. It's a really, you know, it's in 2/4. It's not even a dance piece. It's a very haunting, almost exotic sounding outer section that's quite relaxed and full of fantasy, almost Mendelssohnian. And then it has this really Hungarian dance, you know, yampa da da dumpa da da dumpa da da hey, you know, middle section, which is just the opposite of the way these things usually go. And Brahms does it again in the slow movement, which is a variation movement where you have, you know, it's an adagio basically, but it has this really vigorous middle section. There's something happening here formally that binds all of the movements together in terms of their overall structure. Really fabulous stuff. Anyway, that was the Raphael Ensemble. Also terrific is this one, which is on pentatone with the WDR chamber players. Now, because sextets are not regularly constituted ensembles, they're usually quartets with 2 more people thrown in. Get it? 6. You find that orchestras, the members of orchestras that have separate chamber ensembles, tend to do these pieces, and they do them extremely well. This is quite good. There's also another fabulous one with the Amsterdam Concertgebouw soloist. It's just wonderful. It's beautiful. So, I mean, just so you know about that. And then there was a recording that came out that I reviewed for Classics Today. You can look it up with Renaud Capuçon on Erato and all of his friends. That was live from like the Aix-en-Provence Festival or someplace like that. And it was also just beautiful. I mean, these pieces just respond well to players, to recordings, to being stuck in somebody's little, you know, listening living room in a townhouse in Greenwich Village. I mean, they just work. And boy, do they work. Also excellent, the Nash Ensemble on Onyx. This is a wonderful, wonderful set that gives you the sextets, the piano quartets, the string quintets, and the clarinet trio. A beautiful collection of Brahms chamber music. I'm going to do an ideal list of Brahms chamber music at some point. I got to do that. I really do. I'm going to take me a little time to put it together, but we're going to do that because it's necessary. You know, Brahms was, of course, you know, a great master of everything he attempted, but, you know, there are only 13 orchestral pieces, and there's lots more chamber music. And if you don't know Brahms's chamber music, then you really don't know Brahms. It's really that simple, because you could argue, I think, with a lot of justification, that he put a lot of his best effort and energy into his chamber works. I mean, they're really extraordinary. Also, speaking of extraordinary, oh yes, the Talich Quartet on La Dolce Volta. This is really wonderful. This was sort of my go-to recording for many, many years. It still is. I still love it. However, if I had to pick just one, the one I would take, it's also a recent one, is this one with the Mandelring Quartet and friends playing a sextet. I'm going to get this straight, on Audite. It's, first of all, stunningly well recorded. The Mandelring Quartet is just a wonderful group, and they play the living daylights out of both sextets. There, I got it. And it's a gorgeous recording. And Audite is just a wonderful label. They deserve your support. If you can get your hands on this one, do feel free to give it a listen. Now, there's something else I wanted to talk about with respect to the G major sextet. It is so beautiful. And I don't know if I'm the only one who thought, gee, you know, it would make really wonderful transcription for string orchestra. There are moments where you just want to hear it sung out by a big string section. Well, turns out that that's actually been done a couple of times. Dmitri Sitkevetsky did it on Nonsuch. That's an older recording that some of you may have gotten back in the day. It's long out of print. But here's the juicy part. Do you know who did an orchestral, a string orchestra arrangement of the G major sextet? None other than Kurt Atterberg. I mean, yes, Kurt Atterberg, who was a wonderful composer in that sort of romantic vein. He's just the guy to do it, I thought, you know? And that recording is available. It's on BIS. It's coupled with Atterberg's cello concerto with Truls Mork, and you can download it, you can order it, you can get it. I'm going to get the cover and stick it up there so you can see it. And I really, really recommend it very strongly because, boy, does it sound great when arranged for a string orchestra. Just wonderful, wonderful, wonderful piece. So I hope that this has given you a sense of where you can go in the Brahms sextets. Like I said, you're in very good shape when it comes to recordings, but the music itself is something to savor. It really is. Get them and have just an afternoon wallow in sumptuous string sonorities, allied to an absolutely perfect mastery of form. They're just incredible pieces, and they have enriched my life and my friendships, and they are life-changing experiences, and they will be for you too. All you have to do is keep on listening. Thank you, friends. Take care.